I'm gonna redesign this and turn it into this. Today you'll see how I use an insanely simple framework for turning boring sites into award-winning immersive experiences. The secret is to use the brand narrative for all of our design decisions. Now this is the exact approach we take at my agency, Suits and Sandals, that's gotten us awards and helped all of our clients grow their businesses. Our goal for this redesign is to create a much more impactful landing page that will showcase this product in a memorable way. With that in mind, let's check out the original page together so I can show you how I review and audit existing designs. Okay, here we go. So this is the page that we'll be redesigning. It's pretty standard. You should be somewhat familiar with this layout because it's kind of a traditional e-commerce product detail page. And then if we keep scrolling down, the final section is this giant background image that we have additional content that sits on top of it. We can kind of see that the overall story, the overall mood, and just the general experience is pretty much imbued into the content and also the images themselves. Our goal for today is to embed all of those things into the general experience of the website. When I look at this, I see the statement, uncover pure hydration, discover a new level of performance for your bottle. Like, what's jumping out at me? Focus in on uncover. We need to visually communicate this feeling of uncovering. I start to think about, let's say, curtains uncover, right? I also start to think about unpacking. So some techniques that could be useful for this to really extract out different ideas for these types of words is to use things like mind maps. So mind maps are essentially when you have, I'll just draw it down here, when you have your keyword, let's say, right? You have your keyword, and then you would just basically associate based on that. Unpacking, right? It reminds me of that. It truly is up to you to try to extrapolate as many words as you can. It's important to start compiling all of these words so that you can kind of use them as your tools essentially, or your ingredients for when you're trying to brainstorm and come up with different design solutions. I'm also looking at the assets and how these words, this narrative relates to the assets, because as you know, the assets are also part of the brand narrative or the page's narrative, right? So it has to be cohesive. I look at an image like this, for sure, I get this feeling of discovery. Another thing that I like to do is kind of expand the narrative itself. We're gonna have to create an unfamiliar environment so that you can create the sense of discovery. Like, how are you supposed to create a sense of discovery, right? Like, there's a couple of ways that I'm thinking about. One, you can kind of like hide things and then reveal them. So that's kind of like, oh, there it is, that's discovery. But then also there's a deeper one of kind of like what this guy is doing, of the sense of like exploring, right? Like exploring new territories, exploring new environments and new worlds. And I think that kind of matches up with this on-the-go vibe of the photography that we're seeing here. Make sure to expand the brand narrative in such a way that the words that come out of that expansion still fits with the words that's actually within the brand narrative. So I hope that makes sense. So once we have all of that, we at least now have a pretty clear idea and direction. Now you can kind of dive into your research and start looking for images or other websites that gives you a sense of discovery, gives you a sense of stepping into the unknown, uncovering. So you'll want to start kind of building up a general mood board or references for these types of things. Maybe it's interactions will get you there. Maybe it's just, different types of layouts or ornaments or graphics, right? For today, we're gonna keep it very simple, and we're gonna, kind of skip the reference gathering part of it because that's really straightforward. Again, you're just gathering references based on these words and the emotions you get out of them, and whether or not they resonate with each other. But for today, I think we can just jump right into the actual meat of it, which is the layout design. All right, and here we are in Figma. I've organized into sections. So here are my references, page comp that we're going to be redesigning that we were just looking at. Gone ahead and organized my assets here. Over here, I have a section called main, where all of kind of just the main ideas will live in, and this is where we'll be designing. We need to create a sense of like an unfamiliar environment so that we can bring in that sense of discovery. What do I mean by an unfamiliar environment, especially in the context of this visual language that we're working with? I'm going to start with a grid because of the visual identity is very kind of minimal, right? So it has to be pretty gridded out. So even though we want to create this unfamiliar kind of really unique layout, we want to make sure we tie back and respect the visual brand. So we don't want to just kind of start freestyling and creating this chaotic kind of scene. I might just start experimenting with different blocking kind of techniques. So I'll just grab some rectangles and start pulling, start blocking things out. So I think that's the level of uniqueness or unfamiliarity that we need with our layout. Going in this direction where you have different aspect ratios might be just going a little too far. Here, this one's also really clean and nice, but when I look at something like this, maybe it's still too basic and standard. So I would probably want to go somewhere here where I can kind of see it being loose and a little bit more unique, I suppose. Now that we have that, we've got somewhat of a framework here for our layout design. Let's kind of quickly curate what images will go where. We'll put this image here. So the next image we have is this one. Let's scale this up a little. Let's grab the final image and drop it into our last frame. The next thing is just generally speaking, blocking out where our type will go. So we're gonna use typography the same way we would use graphics. So I'm pushing this down a little bit to make some space. All right, so let's grab some text here. Hydration. I want this top area to be like kind of a wow moment, basically a heroic kind of experience when you land on this page. Hydration here, we make it gigantic. That's looking pretty nice. This actually won't work because we need a nav up here. So we are actually gonna have a navigation element that needs to exist over here. Let's move this back here and just use it almost kind of a texture or a background. It wouldn't make sense to have text above that, but I can see us having text running down here, marquee or something. So it's text that's scrolling. We can basically use this and this, like the data to make it a marquee. So we have the marquee here, and then let's just, grab the rest and just duplicate it. Now we have it there. I don't want to obstruct the our main product image, of course. So I'm gonna send that to back. Let me drop a nav here. I've already designed it. So this is already feeling very unfamiliar, very unique. We need to push it much further. So let's see, we need more text here. So uncover pure hydration. Let's do like that size. Let's bring in our grid once again, just so we can kind of be a little bit more strict with our layout. Okay, so we need some text there, and then a big text there. So let's continue to do that and drop it in. Here, we want a feeling of like, a caption type of moment. Let's drop some data in here, some kind of stats. So with this, I'm kind of just going to loosely align these ones perhaps like this. There's a lot of inconsistency with our vertical spacing. Maybe this isn't working as well, but you can see how quickly you can get to a pretty interesting solution just by thinking about the brand narrative and really falling back on those trigger words. So, if we can kind of just look where we came from, we went from here to this type of design. So we already have kind of this, feeling or, this comp here that's looking really good. We have to think to ourselves, is this enough? Does this get us there? Of course, we can layer on interactions, and that's where we're gonna get that feeling of uncovering, that feeling of discovery and stuff like that, right? All of our verbs can be visualized through interaction. But just looking at this as a static comp, does this feel unfamiliar enough, right? Like, what else can we do? So we've been latching on to unfamiliar. The typography feels unfamiliar, so that's a check. The layout feels unfamiliar, another check. Well, what's feeling familiar here? I think the frames, how the images are being shown. So how can I make these individual moments feel unique? Let's play around with really extreme cropping and masking. If you're doing something similar like this, you will definitely need to do your own research and try to see how other people have treated containing their images and see if there's any interesting, super unique ways they've done it. And in my research, I've come across, it's pretty trendy these days to have archways on these frames because it is very familiar and, it looks like you're looking through a window or through this archway. That doesn't feel as special almost in our particular case. And so if our goal is to have something that's a little bit like, I've never seen that shape before, we might not want to go with something like this. And what I've decided is to potentially just add that extreme kind of curve on just one corner of the shape. And so now you have something that's, not quite a rectangle, not quite the trendy archway that you would see. You have something that's a little bit more special than just a traditional rectangle. If we move on to the next one, in some ways you could leave it here, but I want to push this a little bit further, make it a little bit more special. And with this one, I opted for manipulating two corners. So one also on the top left, but also I was thinking of doing it in the bottom right. And now, because the height of these things are very similar to each other, again, creating kind of almost, if someone was just quickly scrolling through this, they might not even notice the different corner treatments that we've applied here. And so I might want to exaggerate this a little bit more by potentially just cropping it or shrinking the height of this third one. And so with this one, let's go ahead and bring it all the way down to somewhere around here. So now you can kind of see we're getting somewhere here. It's looking completely different, but our balance is a little bit off. Let's go ahead and also reduce the overall height of this element up here to something like around here. That's a little bit too on the nose with what we got going on here. So I'm thinking let's adjust this a little bit further. Just see if we can get something here that's looking a little bit nicer. I'll also potentially adjust the width in general so that it's kind of, again, a more unique shape than the other frames that we have on the screen. So that's looking a little bit better there. Okay, so now things are really starting to come alive here. I've reduced the overall size of some of these frames, and I'm gonna go ahead and begin making some more adjustments so that our overall kind of alignment and things like that feel a little bit better, so it's not feeling like it's just all over the place. So this is kind of the refined look now. So I've gone ahead and adjusted some sizing here. I've also added the price tag right up top here, as well as the buy now button right in the front center here. I'm thinking we need something a little bit more in the middle or something subtle in the background that'll kind of just add a dimension to it, because otherwise this might feel a little too flat for what we're going for. And so this is really where I'm trying to push where the brand is and what the brand will allow. So through my exploration, I kind of landed on using this shape. So let me put it right over here just so you can see. So I've drawn a bunch of circles here that kind of intersect with one another to create these really interesting arches. And so what the idea here is, I would basically just paste this on to the composition and bring it all the way to the back. And so now it's extremely subtle back there where you're not even really sure that it's there. But what it is doing is it's tying these kind of elements with each other. The solution was really simple. It was just drawing a bunch of circles to create these curves, and that was it. I didn't have to apply a grass texture or some distressing or something like that. I'm pushing the brand for sure, but definitely not to the point where I'm starting to reinvent what the visual identity looks like. Last piece I think that we'll add to this is the bottom section, which I've comped out right here. And so I might just drop it in like that. Now we can preview what our page currently looks like, just to see how this will feel once we're on the browser. And you can see, I think it really was a good choice to bring things closer together, vertically speaking, as well as adding that little touch, that minimal touch of curves in the back there, just again to add a little bit of a kind of dimension to it and texture. I've prototyped this by now to be fixed with the scroll, so you can kind of see what that feels like. So that adds a really interesting, feeling to it. And yeah, so this is kind of our composition. Let's go ahead and go into Webflow to put this thing together and bring it to life with some scroll interactions. All right, so here we are in Webflow. Let me walk you through how I built this whole thing and just kind of skim over some details on why I made certain decisions and how that enhances the brand narrative and our overall project goal. So let's hop right into here. So you can see here that we have, first of all, the marquee going on in the background here. So this one is really interesting. With my marquees, I like to avoid using JavaScript for this one. And so just technically speaking, I'm doing my marquee just through CSS transforms and animations. If you're interested to learn more about this stuff, more of the technical side of things instead of the theory, which is what we've been discussing today, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to produce more of those types of content. All right, so the very first thing is we knew that interactions will play a really big role in terms of enhancing and completing the story we're trying to tell. And because we were treating these frames or these containers holding the images as sort of windows into, being able to communicate that trigger word of uncovering, I've decided to create the images in such a way that they're positioned fixed. And so that means that they are completely fixed to the browser window. And so as you scroll, you kind of see them in the background there and they're totally fixed to this window. Using fixed elements is very, very tricky. Typically, you would want to reserve it for things like this buy now button, or if you want to, maintain your navigation up at the top. When you start using fixed for more decorative purposes, like how I'm treating these images, it gets really difficult to maintain the aspect ratio, to maintain their visibility even. And so, I would definitely, take caution if you are going to be using this technique. The biggest thing here is we definitely wanted this effect. There are some other ways you can achieve this, namely by parallaxing the image behind this the shape so that you get kind of that same window-like effect. I found that didn't really give you this super tangible, super concrete feeling of uncovering, and it wasn't obvious or exaggerated enough. So I made the decision to use a fixed image solution. As far as creating these quote unquote windows or these frames, I went ahead and decided to use clipping masks on using CSS to basically have an inset. So you can think of it as like a hole puncher on a piece of paper. I've, inset or cut out this shape of this div. So you can see that, I can go over here. Let's open up one of these things. I have this div called product mask container. Let me open it up for this one. So I have this product mask container, which is just a white rectangle. It's a div, a normal div, but then I have some code that has clipping mask property on it with some values that allows it to be an inset and basically cuts out this whole area. And then through that property, I'm able to add some border radius where I'm kind of specifying this exaggerated border radius on the top left. And to show you how I'm doing that, let me open up an HTML embedded element here. So you can see here, this is the product mask container is2. I've added a combo class for each of these items just so I can isolate them. And here's the clipping path I was just talking about. It's inset, like I was saying, it's on the inside, and just some property values here to draw the shape. There is a really useful website called, I think it's called Clippy or CSS Clippy or something like that. I'll put a link to it in the description below, but it allows you to customize clipping masks visually, so you don't have to deal with numbers. But then also I have this round property here within the clip path, and this is basically how I'm drawing out the border radius. So this goes from top left, right, bottom left. So that is how I'm creating that. And this really allows me to have this really nice controlled effect. And I think when you're going for something so minimal and simple like this, we need our technical solutions to be as elegant as possible. The other aspects to this, I've gone ahead and placed our big background texture back there as just a background element. I didn't make it fixed because originally I wanted this kind of pattern to be fixed and similar to the images where, the content that's scrolling would be kind of scrolling by while this pattern would be fixed in the background. As you can see here, as I'm scrolling, you can kind of see here on the T, this curve moves up with everything else, whereas the images kind of stays fixed. I made that decision because there were too many things going on once I implemented it. It started to feel like it was forced, and of course, we want to make sure that, especially with a brand aesthetic like this, we want to make sure that we're not just applying effects and applying things just for the sake of applying them. So you can kind of see I've just applied it right on my section main, which is wrapping kind of this top to bottom, this whole area right before this fixed background right here. And yeah, so I just decided not to make it fixed. And let's see what else is here. As the user scrolls, it slightly moves our large decorative text back here, hydration, to the left. This gives it that unique flavor. This gives it kind of that depth almost, and just a nice kind of feeling to it. So again, I didn't want it to be a main focal point or kind of capture your attention too much, but for people that are scrolling and not really paying attention to it, or even those that do notice it, it adds this extra kind of butter to the scroll. You know, it adds that really nice choreographed feeling motion to it. It's a pretty minimal layout, so anywhere we can inject the uniqueness, this kind of discovery, you know, all of our brand narrative, that's really, you know, what we want to go for, and we want to do it in a really subtle way. So you can kind of see here, I'm not completely moving the entire thing. I'm just moving it by a few pixels. And that's really enough to get the effect across, to communicate our brand narrative through that. So that's kind of a really subtle interaction that I have going on there. As far as other interactions that I have, I did add this cover, which is basically acting as a page introduction. So over here, I have this intro block that is currently hidden, but if I set this to display, yeah. So it's just a, you know, plain white kind of background with, you know, a tagline right in the middle, just to add a little bit more of a cinematic entrance to the website. I think this gives a nice, you know, we talked about this curtain revealing, uncovering effect, so this certainly adds to that. And, you know, it's a nice little touch. I always kind of hesitate to implement these types of things because for returning users, you don't always want to, you know, spend time every single time like seeing this animation, but for the simple landing page, I thought that, you know, it warranted it, and it did a pretty good job enhancing the brand narrative, and so I opted for that. And you kind of saw here when I previewed it, yeah, it just fades in and then fades right out, and then you're right on the landing page. I didn't add any other animations to it or anything like that. Our goal, you know, is really, I can't say it enough, but you need to just get the gist of it. We don't have to spell everything out to our audience, right? So I needed to just get it out there that this is a revealing effect, and that's it. I didn't need to add text animations or all these crazy things. I just needed to unveil the landing page, and that's exactly what I did there. And I think that's a much more tasteful and a much more successful way to communicate the brand narrative. That's really it for the interactions and animations. As we scroll down, you kind of see here for this whole section, this I'm using a fixed background. So you can kind of see, let's try and find where this div is. So right here, I have a background element that's set to cover, and of course, I didn't want to tile it and just set it to fixed. And that's what's giving us this effect where it's fixed to the background of the website. And this is the experience. I added, you know, some nice smooth scrolling on it, but, you know, I think this does a really great job at communicating the brand narrative that we had, maintaining the visual aesthetics of the brand. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this process. It's very theory oriented, and I wanted to just make sure that it wasn't just another tutorial. I wanted to give you the tools that I use, the framework that I use to create and to redesign things in a really meaningful way. So I hope you found some value in that. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end here, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.